Today, we're going to get into one of the most brilliant and, let's be honest, one of the most horrifying essays ever written. We're breaking down Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal to figure out how such a monstrous idea became one of the greatest pieces of social criticism of all time.
So let me start by asking you a question. Imagine you had to solve a massive problem like widespread poverty and hunger. But here's the catch. You can only use cold, hard logic, no emotion. What would you do? What's the most efficient solution you can think of?
Well, back in 1729, Jonathan Swift gave his answer. He proposed that the poor people of Ireland should just sell their one-year-old kids as food for the rich. Yep, you heard that right. It is stomach-turning, it is shocking, and he presented the whole thing as if it were a perfectly reasonable economic plan.
And that, right there, is the central mystery we're looking into today. How does a respected author, a dean in a cathedral no less, publish a detailed, step-by-step guide to cannibalism? To figure it out, we need to play detective and look at the clues he left for us.
First things first, every investigation has to start at the scene of the crime. For us, that's the Ireland that Jonathan Swift was living in. Because trust me, you can't understand the proposal without understanding the world that made it possible.
So let's set the scene. The year is 1729. Ireland isn't its own country. For all intents and purposes, it's a colony of England. And that's not just a fact from a history book. It had absolutely devastating, real-world effects on the people trying to survive there.
And I mean, life was brutal. We're talking about poverty on a massive scale. Ireland's wealth was basically being vacuumed up and sent over to England through crushing taxes, unfair laws, and landlords who could charge whatever they wanted. Trade was so restricted that the Irish couldn't build their own economy. The result? The streets of Dublin were just filled with beggars and starving children. It was a horrifying but completely normal sight.
And this is the first huge piece of the puzzle. England's policies were already, in a way, consuming Ireland. They were devouring its resources, its money, the very livelihoods of its people. All Swift did was take that metaphor and make it shockingly, unforgettably literal.
So, we've got the scene, but what was the weapon? You see, Swift's genius wasn't just in what he proposed, but in how he said it. He took the cold, calculating language of his era and turned it right back on itself.
In the 18th century, this new way of thinking called rationalism was all the rage. Policymakers started looking at huge human problems not as moral tragedies, but as, well, accounting problems. Starving people weren't a tragedy, they were a drag on the economy. Human lives could be plugged into a cost-benefit analysis.
And this kind of thinking was absolutely everywhere. People were constantly publishing pamphlets with their own practical and reasonable ideas for managing the poor, treating them like they were livestock or just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was a completely dehumanizing way to look at suffering.
Now here's the crucial part. Swift didn't invent this way of thinking. He just took it and pushed it to its absolute limit. He essentially asks, okay, if we're all going to agree to treat human beings like economic commodities, what is the most logical, the most profitable, the most efficient thing to do? And the answer his satire provides is cannibalism. He exposed the monster hiding just beneath the surface of their reason.
We've looked at the scene and the weapon, so now let's look at the mastermind himself. Who exactly was Jonathan Swift, and what could possibly drive him to write something so ferocious?
Swift was a pretty complicated guy. As the dean of a major cathedral in Dublin, he was technically part of the ruling class, but he was absolutely enraged by how England was treating Ireland. At the same time, he was also frustrated with the Irish people for not, in his view, fighting back harder. But at his core, Swift wasn't a cynic. He was a moralist who believed deeply in justice and compassion, and what fueled his anger was seeing those values completely ignored.
And he was incredibly clever. He knew that the popular way to talk about these issues was through these dry, serious political pamphlets, so he designed his essay to look and sound exactly like one of them. He lured his readers in, making them expect another boring policy paper, and then he sprang his horrifying trap. It was basically a Trojan horse made out of satire.
So now we have all the pieces of the puzzle. The history, the intellectual climate, the author's burning anger. Let's put it all together and figure out what was A Modest Proposal really about.
It really works in 3 simple steps. First, Swift lays out the very real, very terrible problem of suffering in Ireland. Second, he offers up his completely fake satirical solution, cannibalism. But he does it using that cold economic language everyone was used to hearing. But the third step is the whole point. The essay isn't actually attacking cannibalism, of course not.
It's an attack on the cold-hearted indifference of the powerful, the politicians, the landlords, anyone who could see this suffering every single day and simply choose to look the other way.
And that's why an essay that's almost 300 years old still feels so powerful today. It's a timeless warning. It forces you to ask, what kinds of cruelty do we accept in our own world just because they're dressed up as being economically rational or practical? The true horror of a modest proposal isn't the shocking idea it presents. It's the chilling reflection of a society that could be indifferent enough to let things get that bad in the first place.